All right, guys, today I've got some tips on how you can improve on your sports betting. The advice here is really good for those of you who are new to the game, but for you more experienced sports bettors, I think you're going to find this useful as well. First things first, I want you to check your ego at the door. Betting on sports is so hugely ego-driven. I think any risk-taking type of endeavor like this is that way. We all want to be right. We all want to show our friends that we were right, our family that we were right, because taking a risk of any sort comes with a bit of anxiety. It's a risk after all. We not only want to reap the benefits of that risk when we are right, but we want others to know, hey, I was not stupid in taking this risk. The greater the risk you take, of course, the more accolades you want for it, as well as the profits that come with it. I don't really put a lot of weight into when someone tells me about they knew this big upset was going to happen, unless they actually put their money where their mouth is. So understanding the psychology and why you might be betting in the first place, you're gonna want to tone that ego down. Don't get yourself too hyped up when you win, and don't be down on yourself all that much when you lose. You've got to try to keep an equilibrium. I know it almost makes it less exciting to play the games, but if you really want to do this like the pros, you've got to take a lot of the emotion out of it. We can't brag every time that we win, and we can't go into hiding every time we lose. For me, it's of great importance to have the right mindset when I'm either betting on sports or trading stocks or currencies or anything like that. I need to know that I'm doing it for the right reason. I'm doing this, I'm making this bet or this play, or I'm buying this stock because I have information, or I think my information is better than the market's information, and I'm going to act on it. And I could be wrong. I know going in that I could be wrong, and it's not the end of the world. This goes hand in hand with using proper money management. And of course, I've got a money management video that you can check down below in the description. All right, now that we have the psychology and the mindset that we want before we start betting, let's now talk about some of the mechanics behind sports betting and some tips and advice that might help you out. Firstly, I want to talk about early lines and why you should be looking at the early lines, the initial posted line. So in the NFL, you're going to start getting lines on the following week's games on Sunday night, usually for teams that have already played the Sunday afternoon games. I want you to have your lines ready before those lines get posted. So I want you to look ahead at the following week and figure out what you think those lines should be. As a matter of fact, I want you to do that before the games are played on Sunday. I want you to do that in the other sports as well. So in the NBA, you may not have a lot of back-to-back games, but I want you to have the next 2 or 3 games handicapped and have lines put on those games based on the information you have right now. But especially in the NFL, where the square bettors or the new bettors tend to bet the day of the game, I want you to really get used to writing down lines for next week's games before this week's games are even played. So while the games are going on, the market is going to start to change, because the perception of a team going into this week's game may be totally different going into next week's game, and a lot of that is based on what happened this week. And as we know in sports, one game doesn't necessarily change much about a team, but the perception is always there that that game is indicative of exactly how that team is. So when a team plays poorly, we tend to see the line get skewed the following week against that team. And conversely, if a team plays extremely well, they may be bet a little bit more the following week. And as such, the line is going to change. This is why you don't see lines placed on games typically until the teams have played. If you have the teams playing on Monday Night Football, they're often not going to let you bet either one of those teams' games for the following week until that Monday Night Football game is complete. Now, some of that has to do with injuries, but a lot of it has to do with perception. So sharp bettors tend to bet the early line because the early line could be the softest line there is. That closing line is very difficult to beat. The closing line now has all of the market information encapsulated in that price. So what you need to know is exactly how is the line posted. The lines are posted differently today than they were a long time ago. A long time ago in Vegas, the books were controlled by individual owners, and they had sportsbook managers who would set the price, set the line, and you could find a decent disparity between one book and the other, because the sportsbook manager at one casino may have an opinion on a game that differs than the casino right next door, and you could see a difference in a point or two on the lines. A lot of the old-time sportsbook managers were really just professional handicappers. They were really good at handicapping sports, kind of like in the movie Casino. The Robert De Niro character had a knack for picking sports and putting a number up on a game. As corporations got involved, technology became better, the difference between sportsbooks became a lot less, and then companies formed that would actually give the sports books all the same type of information. They would post numbers on the games, and then the sports book would use their information to post their initial opening line. Now, the way the sports book would try to mitigate their risk, they would give very low limits early in the week, especially like an NFL. So the initial bets had a cap, may have been a $500, $1,000 cap, because they didn't want the sharps to come in and pick off really bad lines early in the week for a large amount of money. So they would let the sharps come in early, and if the number was bad that they posted, they'd be able to move that line gradually without taking on too much risk early on. Of course, it became a cat and mouse game because sharps would come in and bet the opposite side of what they actually like, hoping that they can move the book in one direction or the other. When the limits increased, then they would be able to come in and hammer it at a higher price. So they would be willing to punt off some small bets in order to hammer the books with bigger bets. There's been games going on between the books and sharp bettors for years, some of which I've been through, and a lot of the sports books like to brag that, hey, we'll take any bets, but it's actually not true. So the reason we want to catch that soft line is you may not realize just how big an advantage is to get that half point or a point in our favor when we're sports betting, but it's tremendous. And depending, of course, on where we're getting that extra half point or a point, what I mean by that is what number are we moving off or on, it could be a significant amount of value. Just look at the alternate lines in NFL or NBA. If you look at those alternate spreads and just look at how much they're charging you to gain that extra half point or a point, well, we're able to do that by betting soft lines early on in the week. We're able to actually buy those points without having to buy those points. So if they're charging us 10 cents to buy a half a point and we were able to get that half point without paying the 10 cents, that's a huge advantage. And what I mean by 10 cents is, let's say in an NFL game, you bet -6 at -110 early in the week. And when the game goes off, it is now -6.5, -110. You picked up that half point, which is great, but what you really did was pick up 10 cents. Because if you looked at the alternative line, it may be now that you'd have to pay -120 to get that -6. And if you look at the 10 cents, that would equate to about 2% or so, meaning you need to be 2% less accurate in order to make a profit on these games. So that would be the equivalent of, if you took all -110 games, you need to be 52.4% accurate to break even. You would now only have to be 50-50, essentially taking away all of the advantage the sportsbook has. Don't take it lightly. There's a big advantage into getting good prices. So with that said, I want you to look into having multiple sports books. No sharp bettor is betting at one out, as we call them. We're betting at multiple sports books. And the reason for that is exactly what I was talking about when I was talking about betting early lines, is we want to get the best possible line we can. If I've got 3 books, the chances are greater that I'm going to find a line more beneficial to me than if I had 1. If I had 5 or 10, of course, I increase my probability even more. And if you have a lot of sports books, there's opportunities for arbitrage. So let's say you had a situation where a college basketball game you were able to get at -6, and then later in the week at another sports book that was offering it at 6.5, 7 is now all the way up to 8, and you're paying -110 on both sides. You now have a possibility to play that game at +8 at a very low risk. You're risking just the vig on your bet, with the possibility of either catching the middle at 7 and winning both sides, or pushing one side and winning the other side. So you'd have to run the numbers there and figure out, is this a good arbitrage situation? But understand those arbitrage situations are available to you. I know some professional sports bettors who don't handicap games at all. They just strictly look for these arbitrage situations. And with the technology as it is now, we've got access to many more sports books, and we can bet on these games a lot quicker than we could back when I was betting, and I had guys betting for me in Las Vegas where they'd have to run from casino to casino to place a bet. When the Sharp app is launched, you're going to see we've got what we call an aggregator, where in your specific state, you can look at all the legal sports books and see exactly what prices they're offering on each and every event. This is a really quick and easy way for you to find the best price on a game you're looking for. And I would strongly suggest opening accounts at each of those sports books so that you can quickly access the best prices in the market. So let's talk a second on why games move in the first place and why a line may change. There's often a lot of talk about sports books wanting equal money on both sides. Ideally, yeah, that would be a great thing, because then the sports book has no risk whatsoever, but it's not always the best way for the sports book to maximize their profits. Now, there's some art to this and there's some science, of course, but let's say a sports book knows that the favorite should be a 7.5-point favorite, and they're going to cover that game 50% of the time. Of course, they don't know with certainty, but let's say that they're saying this team is a 7.5-point favorite is going to cover 50% of the time. But they know that the market tends to favor the favorites. And let's say if they put the number all the way up to -10, that's where they would find an equilibrium in the market. But they may not want that equilibrium. So they may post this at -8.5, knowing that that's too many points. That's already giving 1 point too many to the favorite, but they're going to get more than 50% action on the favorite still at 8.5. They're not getting to that equilibrium point until they get to 10, but they don't want it at the equilibrium point. They just want that 1 point advantage that they think they have at 8.5. Now, what's going to move that line is if they take significant action from sharp bettors. If the square bettor, the average bettor, is hammering this game at -8.5, that's exactly what the sportsbook wants. What they don't want is a lot of sharp money coming in at +8.5. If they get that and they can't balance that sharp money off with square money, then you'll see the line move. Now, worst case scenario for the sportsbook is when they've got the sharp money and the square money pounding the same side of the game, and then you'll definitely see the line move because they're taking way too much risk, or more risk than they really want to take on a game. Now, the advantage the sportsbook has is they're taking action on every single game. So they're diverse. They may be at risk on one game that's going to lose and at risk on another game that's going to win. If they have enough bets out there over time, they're going to make money. Where they run into the most risk are games like the Super Bowl, where everyone is betting that game. And that's a game where they really want an equilibrium. They want bets equal on both sides. That number, of course, gets scrutinized greatly. They put a lot of work and effort into coming up with that number. And oftentimes you won't see the Super Bowl line move all that much because of it. So that brings me into my next point, which is if you are new or experienced, you may want to start looking at lesser bet sports and bet types. So lesser bet sports like tennis or golf, which is becoming a lot more popular, but a lot of the matchups are still under bet. Basically the sports that are not the big four sports here in the United States. The toughest sport to bet is betting spreads in the NFL because the information is plentiful. Everyone has it, everyone's betting on it. The numbers are extremely sharp. The fact that I've been able to be positive in the NFL for as many years as I have is something I'm proud of and also astonished by at the same time, because you always feel like eventually that is going to run out. It's a constant battle. It's a very, very tough game. Ask any professional handicapper, they'll tell you the toughest sport to handicap is the NFL because those lines are so tight. Now, if you're betting football in a small college conference, or you're betting college basketball games in the smaller conferences that aren't big televised games, you may find an edge. There's not as much thought being put into those lines as there are in an NFL game. And the reason for that is they're not going to be heavily bet. I think some people are actually surprised about the limits. I actually was able to bet college basketball games at a much higher limit with my local bookie in New York than I was in Las Vegas. In Las Vegas, some of the smaller college basketball conference games, I had like $200 or $300 limits per sports book because they know they're susceptible in some of those conferences to a sharp bettor. So they don't want to take too much action at one time. They want to be able to gradually move the line. If they allowed an unlimited amount of bets at one time and sharp bettors can pick off lines for $50,000 a pop in college basketball, it would really hurt the book. But even a sharp bettor coming in on an NFL game for $50,000 bet is not that big a deal. They can absorb it because of all the other square money that's coming in on those games. The other thing you may want to look at is betting on props, and how props have become a lot more popular these days with the daily fantasy players and the fantasy sports players, because they're used to looking at games on an individual basis as opposed to necessarily the team and what the team may do in a win or a loss. They're more interested in how a player performs. So if you have a DFS background, a fantasy sports background, you may be attracted to prop bets. And the nice thing with the prop bets are they can be soft. So I have a couple of videos on prop betting that may help you out. Take a look at props, look at them early when they first get posted, and follow them throughout the day. You'll see a lot of these props move in price greatly because of the fact that they're so soft sometimes in their initial opening price. So just like any other bet, once you get accustomed to props and how they work, you really want to start looking at that opening price. And again, start doing your homework the day before or early in the morning before the props get posted so that you're nimble enough to pick off the prices that you like the best. If you're waiting until right before game time, the sharps have already gone through the entire slate and moved the prices to where they should be. This also reminds me of another point that I wanted to talk about when it comes to information. I touched on it with the NFL and NBA on just why it's so difficult to win in those sports when you're handicapping those sports, because there's a ton of information out there. When I get questions from a lot of subscribers over at the Sportsbet Army, they'll ask me questions like, John, so-and-so is injured in this game. Do you think that's going to make a difference? Well, that injury has been known for days. The line has already taken that into account. Now, unless you have some information different than what the market has, all of that information is already baked into the line. Years ago, I've done studies on injuries and which injury to which position player had the biggest impact on spreads, and do they have an impact at all? And the answer was no, they had no impact. Now, with that said, you may be sharp enough where there are injuries to players who don't necessarily move the line. In the NFL, the only players that move the line are the quarterback, almost always, and then slightly, depending on who the running back is, may move the line a little bit. Maybe a wide receiver can move the line, depending on the wide receiver. And there are a few defensive players that can move the line. But on the whole, outside of the quarterback, lines don't move that drastically on other players. So there is a possibility that you understand that team better maybe than the entire market. It's unlikely, but I'm not saying it's not possible. Where you understand that team better, and there may be an ancillary player or a secondary type of player who helps maybe the superstar and we don't realize it. Maybe there's a nose tackle who's really good at taking up 2 and 3 blockers so that the star middle linebacker is clean and can run around and make a lot of plays. And we don't realize just how important that player is. Perhaps that line's not going to move when that nose tackle's out of the game, but it should. But again, these are going to be rare situations because the market's going to have these injuries baked into the price. And not just injuries, it could be any situation. Which is why in the NFL it's been dissected and talked about so much that it's very, very hard to find a soft price in the NFL. Now, if you're looking at football or basketball in a small conference, you may really know that conference well. You've studied that conference. And now a player where if this was the NFL who is hurt, may move the line, is not moving the line on this small college in maybe the MAC conference. It's not moving the line at all, but you think it should, you may have an edge there. So I strongly suggest for the new player and the experienced player to really focus in on a small conference where you can learn all the players, learn the coaches, learn the tendencies. I think you'll become a much more profitable bettor. As you get good there, you can expand and move on to other conferences and other sports. But I think you'll learn a lot from focusing on these smaller sports and smaller conferences in the big sports. Lastly, I think you need to keep records and track your bets. Over in the Sharp app, we're going to have a bet tracking system, which is going to help you a lot in figuring out, am I on the right path here? Am I doing the right thing? Am I capping correctly? A lot of times we like to bury our head in the sand and just assume that what we're doing is working, even though maybe deep down we know it's not. If you can track your bets, analyze it, and make note as to why you made that specific bet. Did I get in early? How much did I beat the closing line by? Look at all that data. It's going to help you improve upon your sports betting. You may not even be that great a handicapper, but you just may be really good at beating the closing line. You've got a good feel for the market and where the closing line will end up. So if you're going through a losing streak and you are continually beating the closing line, yet losing your games, you're on the right track. You're doing the right thing. You're just running into some bad luck, but you're not going to realize that unless you analyze it and say, you know what, I've been beating the closing line by half a point or a point now, and I'm just not getting lucky on these games. That's going to turn around. The key is keep beating that closing line. You're also going to want to track what sports am I doing well in, what conferences within those sports am I doing well in, and then really focus on those sports and maximize your profits. We're trying to maximize our profits here. We're trying to be profitable in the first place. And maybe you're just not that great at betting the NBA, but you love the NBA. So maybe you just want to tone back on your NBA bets. So your unit size might be a quarter of what it is on the Mountain West Conference in college basketball because you dominate that conference. You're really good. You've now analyzed it because you're looking at your tracker in the Sharp app and noticing that's really where I'm doing well. I understand that conference, but I love the NBA and I want to play it and I like the interest. so I can still have fun betting the NBA, but I'm going to do it for a smaller amount because my edge just isn't as great as it is elsewhere. Hopefully some of these tips are going to help out not only the new sports bettor, but some of you more experienced sports bettors as well. I'm going to have a lot more of these. These aren't the only things you really need to focus on, but I think they're some of the most important. As always, help support this channel by liking this video and subscribing. And if you're not a subscriber at the Sportsbet Army, I strongly suggest you do so. You've got access to me and the other coaches there where you can ask questions and chat with us in our Discord channel, as well as access to our models and our sports bets on a daily basis. I look forward to talking to you guys and seeing you over in the Discord channel and having some fun, hopefully making some money. Until the next video, good luck, and let's make some money together.